I just killed Cassie. Oh, fuck. I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body just disappear. Dude, just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke. We waited for this for a long time.
Cassie Jo Stoddart was a 16-year-old high school junior growing up in Pocatello, Idaho, a quiet, close-knit town nestled in Bannock County. Life here moved slowly, gently. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names, where the rhythm of the day was marked by school bells and the fading light over rolling fields. Cassie lived with her mother, stepfather, and siblings in a modest home not far from the center of town. She was the kind of girl who stayed out of trouble. She didn't chase attention, didn't crave the spotlight. She was responsible, dependable, the kind of teenager who turned in homework on time and helped with chores without being asked. At school, she played the clarinet in the band. She was quiet, even reserved, but never distant. She had a warm smile, a dry sense of humor, and a way of making people feel at ease. Her art was where she spoke the loudest. Sketchbooks filled with intricate drawings and imagined worlds. In her free time, she liked reading, listening to music, and spending time with her boyfriend, Matt. They weren't a flashy couple. There were no grand declarations or school-wide drama, just two teenagers who found comfort in each other's presence. Cassie dreamed of becoming a lawyer. She liked order, fairness, the idea that right and wrong were things you could prove. That fall of 2006, she had just begun her junior year at Pocatello High. She was doing well, steady grades, steady life. Her teachers trusted her, her friends liked her. She didn't seek out conflict or gossip. She wasn't someone people feared or envied. She was just Cassie. And for most people who knew her, that was more than enough. That September, Cassie's aunt and uncle were going out of town and needed someone to house sit for the weekend. Their house sat on a quiet road just outside the main town, a long, winding stretch of hills and tall trees. It was the kind of house that felt peaceful in daylight but could turn eerie under the weight of nighttime silence. Still, Cassie agreed. She took it as a sign of trust, a step toward adulthood. Her aunt and uncle had a black Labrador named JJ, and Cassie would be responsible for feeding him, making sure the house was safe, and keeping things in order until they returned. It wasn't glamorous, but Cassie took the job seriously. On the evening of September 22nd, she packed a bag, and Matt came to join her. They had planned a relaxed night. Movies, maybe some homework, just keeping each other's company in the quiet. That same night, two of their classmates, Brian Draper and Tori Adamsick, asked if they could come over for a while. Cassie said yes. It wasn't unusual. All of them had shared classes, lunch breaks, and school hallways for years. They weren't close friends, but they weren't strangers either. If anything, she probably thought it would make the night pass faster. What she didn't know is that Brian and Tori had already decided what kind of night it would be. To the outside world, Brian and Tori were just two ordinary high school juniors. They didn't stand out much. Brian was a little more withdrawn, interested in dark films and counterculture. Tori had more charisma, a sharper edge. They had bonded over a shared love of horror films and their growing detachment from the people around them, but under the surface, their fascination with violence had turned obsessive. They talked endlessly about murder, not in whispers or jokes, but as something real, something they wanted to make happen. They had been planning for weeks, and now they had their opportunity. When Brian and Tori arrived at the house that evening, they acted normal, sat with Cassie and Matt, watched Kill Bill, joked around. But even then, their minds weren't on the screen. They were scanning the house, watching the layout, the lighting, the locks. At one point, they asked to use the bathroom, and while doing so, quietly unlocked a door in the basement. After about 40 minutes, they said they had to leave. Cassie walked them to the door, said goodbye, and thought nothing more of it. But the door in the basement was no longer locked. She didn't know they had already slipped back into the house. They were in the dark, waiting. Later that night, Cassie and Matt sat back on the couch. JJ, the family dog, lay nearby. Everything was still until suddenly the lights went out. Every room in the house went dark. Cassie got scared. Matt tried to comfort her, but the atmosphere had changed. They searched for a reason, maybe a fuse, maybe something wrong with the wiring. After a few minutes, the lights flickered back on. It was enough to shake them, enough for Cassie to feel that something was off. Matt called his mother and asked if he could stay the night. She said no. He offered to get Cassie out of the house, to take her back to her own home, but she refused. She had made a promise. She was house sitting. She wasn't going to abandon that responsibility. At around 10:30 p.m., Matt left. Cassie was alone. Or so she thought. Down in the basement, Brian and Tori had waited patiently. They had turned off the lights from the circuit breaker, testing her reaction. Now they moved upstairs, dressed in black, wearing masks, knives in hand. Their hearts were probably pounding, their minds spinning, but they were calm. They believed this was their moment, the climax of a story they had written for themselves. Cassie heard something, a noise, a door. She turned, but it was already too late. They attacked. Fast. Brutal. 30 minutes after Matt left, Cassie was gone. The call came in just after 1 p.m. on Sunday, September 24th. Cassie's relatives had just returned from their weekend trip. They unlocked the door to their house and stepped inside, and immediately something was wrong. There was blood. A lot of it. Then they found Cassie, lying still in the living room. No movement. No signs of life. They called 911. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but it was too late. Cassie Jo Stoddart had been brutally murdered. The wounds were shocking. There was no mistaking it for an accident or suicide. The house hadn't been ransacked. Nothing had been stolen. The violence didn't look random. It looked deliberate. And suddenly, a quiet town was changed forever. Cassie's mother received the call and her world collapsed. Her daughter, the responsible one, the careful one, gone. Just like that. The pain was immediate, deep, and bottomless. It didn't feel real. It felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Detectives began their work. They started with the last people to see Cassie alive. Matt was the obvious first step. He was interviewed, shaken and grieving. He told them everything. How he'd stayed at the house for a few hours on Friday night, how the lights had gone out briefly, how they'd both been scared. He mentioned that Cassie insisted on staying because she felt responsible. Then, Matt gave the investigators a name. Brian Draper and another, Tori Adamsick. He told them those two boys had come over that night and hung out briefly before leaving. Now they were part of the story. Detectives quickly tracked down Brian and Tori. Both were classmates of Cassie, both known around school. Neither had ever been in serious trouble before. At first, their stories matched. They admitted to visiting the house, watching a movie, and leaving. Simple. But police weren't satisfied. They kept digging. They looked into the boys' backgrounds. They questioned friends. They searched the school. They pulled surveillance footage from local roads and traffic lights. They started examining cell phone records and timelines. Then Brian's story changed. He confessed that he and Tori had returned to the house later that night, but he didn't say why. He hinted at being scared. He claimed they thought about scaring Cassie as a prank, but nothing more. Then he broke. He told them they killed her.
Tori denied everything until detectives presented the evidence. Because what Brian and Tori didn't know was that the police had discovered something chilling, a videotape, a tape that the boys themselves had made. On it, they talked openly about their plan. They recorded themselves hours before the murder, laughing about what they were about to do. And even more disturbing, they recorded themselves again after the murder, bragging, celebrating, mocking Cassie. This wasn't a moment of rage. It wasn't a fight on wrong. It was a planned, premeditated murder. They had talked about it like it was a movie, like Cassie was a character, like her life didn't matter. And now they were caught. They were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The community was stunned. 2 boys, regular, smart, creative, had done something unimaginable. They had hunted a girl, filmed their thoughts, lied to everyone. At school, everything changed. Students cried in hallways. Teachers couldn't understand it. Parents showed up to pick up their kids early. For weeks, a heaviness hung in the air, a fear, a disbelief. Cassie was gone, and the people who took her life had sat in the same classrooms as everyone else. They had sharpened their knives just like they'd sharpen pencils, casually, deliberately. What terrified people most wasn't just the crime. It was that it came from inside. By the time Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk stood trial, Pocatello was no longer a quiet place. News vans lined the streets outside the courthouse. Reporters clutched microphones in the snow. National outlets picked up the story. 2 teenaged boys, 16 years old, had planned and carried out the brutal murder of their classmate. The nation wanted to understand why. But the town just wanted to heal. In the courtroom, Cassie's family sat in front row. Her mother wore black every day. Her younger siblings, too confused to grasp what was happening, sat silently by her side. Every detail spoken aloud, every wound, every quote from the videotape tore open the pain again. Brian and Tori looked so ordinary. Clean haircuts, pressed shirts, hands folded at the defense table. But what they had done was monstrous. The prosecution showed the videotapes. They showed the lists of supplies. They showed the bag of evidence the boys had buried. Gloves, clothes, knives, and the masks they wore. They played audio of them laughing after Cassie was dead. There was no remorse in their voices, no horror at what they had done, only pride. Cassie had fought back. She had tried to survive. She had begged, screamed, cried, and still they kept going. Tori's defense argued that Brian was the mastermind. Brian's defense said it was Tori. They each blamed the other. But the evidence told the truth. They had done it together, not in a moment of anger, but in cold calculation. They idolized horror movies. They wanted to be famous. They thought this murder would make them legends, but instead, it made them prisoners. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder, both of them. The sentence was life, in prison without parole. They would spend every day of the rest of their lives behind bars. no sunlight without bars, no freedom, no more chances. Just walls, just memory, just the echo of Cassie's last breath. The courtroom fell into silence. Cassie's mother wept quietly. Her family clung to each other. There was no celebration, no sense of victory, because nothing, no sentence could bring Cassie back. Outside, the community tried to move forward. Pocatello High School held a memorial. Cassie's favorite drawing was turned into a mural. Teachers spoke about her kindness. Her friends shared stories about her laugh. There were candlelight vigils, black ribbons, silence in the hallways where once there had been chatter. The school changed the way it looked at violence. Counselors were brought in. Security was reviewed. Parents began watching more closely. The world had gotten darker, and everyone could feel it. But what lingered most wasn't fear. It was grief. Deep, aching grief. Cassie had been the good one. She followed the rules. She respected people. She didn't sneak out. She didn't lie. She did everything she was supposed to do, and she died for it. After the verdict, the courtroom emptied. The reporters left. The headlines faded. But for Cassie's family, the sentence wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a lifetime of grief. They returned to a home filled with silence. Her room stayed untouched for months. Her bed remained made. Her clarinet still in its case by the closet. Her sketchbooks sat on her desk, pages open to half-finished drawings. Every corner of the house whispered her name. The world moved on, but her mother could not. There were birthdays with empty chairs, holidays with no laughter. Even the smallest things, a song on the radio, a smell in the kitchen, triggered memories too painful to bear. Cassie had been so full of life, so careful, so responsible. And yet, she had been taken in the most senseless, brutal way imaginable. Her mother refused to let her become just another victim. She began speaking out about teenage violence, about the warning signs, about the lies people tell themselves when they think, "Not my kid." She talked to schools, to parents, to counselors. She told Cassie's story again and again because someone had to. Meanwhile, Brian and Tori sat in prison. They were moved to separate facilities. Their lives now reduced to metal bunks, concrete floors, and routine. Over the years, both would try to appeal their sentences. They claimed their rights were violated, that they were too young for life without parole, that they had changed. But the evidence was too strong. The murder too calculated. The remorse still unclear. Tori, in particular, continued to deny his role for years. He blamed Brian. He claimed he had no idea what was really going to happen. But the videotapes told a different story. Their own words betrayed them. Brian eventually admitted to his guilt and expressed some level of regret, but it came years later. And to many, it was too little, too late. Cassie's family continued to fight against the appeals. They showed up to hearings, wrote letters to judges, gave statements on camera. They wanted the world to remember their daughter mattered. She wasn't a stepping stone in someone else's twisted fantasy. She was a person with dreams, with family,
with a future. In the years that followed, Cassie's name lived on in different ways. Scholarships were created in her honor. Awareness programs were launched to educate teens on the dangers of glorifying violence. Documentaries covered her story. And with every retelling, the message stayed the same. Monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they wear backpacks. Sometimes they sit beside you in class. Sometimes they ask to watch a movie and never leave. The murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart became a warning about obsession, about desensitization, about the fragility of trust. But it also became a call to action, to protect, to notice, to speak up when something feels wrong, to remember that darkness doesn't need to hide, it can live in plain sight. Cassie should have graduated high school. She should have gone to college. She should have chased her dream of becoming a lawyer. She should have grown old with memories, not become one. But instead, her story became a symbol of lost potential, of stolen innocence, of the unimaginable horror that two boys, fueled by fantasy and fame, brought into the real world. Cassie Jo Stoddart, 16 years old, kind, quiet, artistic, responsible, a daughter, a sister, a friend, gone, but never forgotten.